how the ancient Israelites survived the deadly winters of Jerusalem. They say the desert is hot, but that's only half the story. Up in the mountains of Judah, where the winds cut like blades and the nights fall below freezing, another story was unfolding, one that few ever talk about. A story not of palaces or prophets, but of ordinary families who refused to die when the world turned cold. The hidden winter of the Holy Land. The night wind howls across the rocky hills of Judah. Frost bites the stones. The stars shine cold and distant over Jerusalem, a city standing 800 meters above sea level. It's hard to imagine winter here. When we picture the Bible's world, we see blazing deserts, tents, and endless sand. But that's not the full truth. The land of the Bible is also a land of seasons, where temperature can fall close to zero, where snow sometimes drifts across the olive trees, and where survival once meant more than faith. It meant wisdom, ingenuity, and unity. Now imagine this. No electricity, no heating, no modern clothing, no insulated walls. Just a family, a small stone house, and months of wind and rain pressing against their door. How did they survive? How did they keep their children alive through the longest, coldest nights? That's what we're about to uncover. The forgotten winter of the Holy Land, and the remarkable ways God's people learned to master nature's fiercest test. Because survival in ancient Israel wasn't just about strength, it was about understanding creation itself. The genius of biblical survival one, the wisdom beneath the earth. When the cold winds came down from the north, the Israelites did something surprising. They didn't build up, they dug down. Archaeologists who excavate ancient homes in Tel Beer-Sheva or Tel Rod find something curious. The floors are carved deep into the earth, 60, sometimes 90 centimeters below the surface. Why? Because underground, the temperature stays steady. The soil becomes nature's insulation, warm in winter, cool in summer. Before skyscrapers or smart thermostats, they discovered something every engineer now knows. The ground remembers the sun, and the deeper you go, the more you escape the chaos of the weather above. But the floor was only the beginning. Their walls, massive, thick, layered with stone and packed earth, were crafted with purpose. Two outer lines of large limestone blocks held a chamber of smaller stones and compacted soil in between. That air pocket trapped heat, keeping it inside far warmer than the freezing air outside. And the limestone itself? It acted like a battery. During the day, the sun's warmth seeped in. At night, the stone slowly released it. A silent miracle of God's natural design. Their homes were not primitive huts. They were living machines, tuned to the rhythm of creation. 2. Fire without flames. But even the best walls need fire. So how do you keep fire burning for 6 months straight? Without smoke, without danger, and without running out of wood? The Israelites built what modern archaeologists call radiant fire pits. At the center of every home was a shallow, round depression carved into stone, about 1 meter wide, 20 centimeters deep, lined with flat stones and filled with layers of compacted ash. It looked simple, but it was genius. By day, families cooked their meals there. By night, the glowing embers radiated steady heat long after flames died. The stones absorbed warmth and released it slowly, filling the room with a gentle, even temperature till morning. The fuel wasn't endless logs or roaring fires. It was small pieces of hardwood, olive and oak, and yes, dried animal dung mixed with straw. It may sound strange, but it burned clean, slow, and steady. They had learned to turn waste into warmth, a symbol of survival and redemption itself. And they always placed a fire pit in the center, because heat spreads in all directions, from the heart outward. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The heart of the home was literally a source of light and warmth, just like faith is for the soul. 3. Layers of protection, the mantle of mercy. In the book of Exodus 22, verses 26 to 27, God gave a command. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it before sunset, for that cloak is the only covering he has. What else can he sleep in? That wasn't just poetry, it was survival law. The cloak, or mantle, was more than clothing. It was life itself. Each Israelite wore 3 layers, a linen tunic close to the skin, absorbing sweat and moisture, a thick wool garment for insulation, and a heavy outer mantle woven from dark wool or goat hair, large enough to wrap the whole body. By day, it blocked wind and rain. By night, it became a blanket, a tent, a lifeline. The wool was rich with natural oils that repelled water and trapped warmth even when damp. The darker dyes, blue, brown, black, absorbed sunlight, storing heat through the day. And those fringes the Torah commands, they weren't just symbols of faith. They also kept the cloth from unraveling. God's command to return a poor man's cloak was not just compassion. It was engineering mercy. Without it, a man could freeze to death before morning. And so, even their clothing carried the mark of divine wisdom. Storing the harvest, the science of preservation. Now, warmth alone couldn't keep you alive. You also needed food, for months when the earth slept. But how do you store grain in a land of moisture and pests? The Israelites dug grain silos deep into the rock, some as deep as 8 meters, narrow at the top and wide at the base. This bottle-shaped design did 3 incredible things. The depth kept the temperature constant year-round, around 18 degrees Celsius. The plastered walls blocked soil moisture. Once sealed, the oxygen inside was slowly consumed by the grain's own respiration, creating a low-oxygen environment where insects couldn't survive. Modern scientists call this controlled atmosphere storage. The ancient Israelites called it common sense, and a blessing from God. Even broken cisterns, once used for water, found new life as cool cellars for vegetables. Root crops like onions, garlic, and carrots lasted for months in the damp, shaded chambers beneath the earth. And above ground, families planned relentlessly. Summer was not rest. It was preparation, because those who failed to plan would not see spring. 5. One fire, many hearts. The power of community. The most advanced invention of all wasn't a tool or structure. It was people. It was community. During the winter months, when storms raged over the hills, neighbors gathered together. Some homes had larger clay ovens, not for baking alone, but for everyone nearby. Families took turns sharing fuel, food, and labor. In towns like Capernaum, homes were built in clusters, 6 houses surrounding a shared courtyard. When the temperature dropped, everyone gathered in the largest room, sharing warmth, stories, and life. 30 people in one space could raise the temperature by several degrees. Human heat multiplied by compassion. In the synagogues, stone floors held built-in braziers, glowing through long nights of study and prayer. The Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, was celebrated in midwinter, not just to remember a miracle of oil, but to celebrate the miracle of endurance. And when someone's fire burned out, the neighbor would share a coal, a simple act that could mean the difference between life and death. Faith wasn't only about sacrifice, it was about survival together. When winter came for the unprepared, but not everyone survived. The Bible does not hide that truth. In 2 Kings 6 verse 25, we read that during the siege of Samaria, a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver. That was the price of desperation, the price of unpreparedness. When the cold and hunger came together, famine became death itself. Jeremiah 14 speaks of nobles sending their servants to the cisterns, only to find them dry. Without water, without grain, the winter became a tomb. Archaeologists in Tel Dan have uncovered homes filled with skeletons, entire families who didn't make it through a single brutal winter in the 6th century BC. And then we understand the wisdom of Proverbs 6 verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. Those words weren't just moral advice. They were manuals of survival. Even faith itself required planning, because God's blessings work through human preparation. 7 lessons written in stone and snow. When you walk today through the ruins of Jerusalem or Hebron, you can still feel the story written in stone. Deep floors, thick walls, tiny windows. Every brick tells a story of people who refused to surrender to the elements. They didn't wait for miracles. They lived them. Each fire pit, each grain silo, each mantle of wool was a prayer in motion, a partnership between human hands and divine wisdom. The Israelites understood something our modern age forgets. That creation itself was designed not just to be admired, but to be worked with. God had already placed the tools for survival on the earth: the wind, the stone, and the sheep's wool. All humanity needed was the eyes to see and the heart to act. Conclusion: the fire that never dies. When the last storm of winter passed and spring finally touched the hills of Judah, the families who survived gathered again, not to boast, but to give thanks. They knew that survival had not come from comfort, nor from wealth, but from wisdom, preparation, and the warmth of one another. And perhaps that's the deeper lesson the Bible whispers through every frozen night of history. No one survives alone, not in the mountains of Judah, not in the deserts of life. The warmth that saves us is shared warmth. The faith that carries us is shared faith. Because when God teaches his people how to live, he doesn't only command worship. He teaches how to build houses that keep out the cold, how to store grain for tomorrow, and how to love your neighbor enough to keep their fire alive too. The winters of Jerusalem still come, but so does the light, the same light that once reflected from limestone walls, warmed by fires of faith, and hearts that refuse to go dark. The hidden genius of life in the Bible lands one, the kingdom beneath the sand. The morning sun rises over the dunes of Egypt, turning the sand into a sea of gold. To the naked eye, it looks endless, silent, lifeless. But beneath that silence, history whispers. You see, Egypt wasn't just a land of pharaohs. It was a crossroads, a place where kingdoms collided, where faith was tested, and where the people of God once found both refuge and danger. Beneath the ground, archaeologists have uncovered entire cities buried under layers of sand, walls still painted with scenes of daily life, bread ovens, granaries, wells, and courtyards. Each one tells a story, that survival wasn't a miracle by chance, but a masterpiece of design. The Egyptians understood the rhythm of the Nile, how it rose and fell, how it brought both blessing and destruction. So they learned to build with the earth, not against it. They used mud from the river to make bricks that breathed, keeping their homes cool in the burning heat and warm when the desert nights turned cold. And it was in this world that God's people, the Israelites, were shaped. Before they ever reached the Promised Land, they learned in Egypt what it meant to endure. It was as if God allowed them to study the art of survival before sending them into the wilderness, a divine apprenticeship in the school of the desert. 2. The Desert School of Faith. After leaving Egypt, the Israelites faced the ultimate test: no cities, no bricks, no Nile, only endless wilderness. The desert strips a person bare. It takes away comfort, luxury, even identity. And yet in that emptiness, something greater can be found. In the book of Deuteronomy, Moses reminds them, "He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness to humble you and to test you, so that in the end it might go well with you." Deuteronomy 8 verses 15 to 16. That's not just history. It's transformation. For 40 years, the people learned to depend not on walls or kings, but on manna, daily provision that fell from heaven like dew. They learned to follow a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, symbols not of comfort, but of trust. Even their tents were built with purpose. Goat hair fabric swelled in the rain, sealing the seams and relaxing the dry heat, letting in the wind. Each stake and rope was placed according to divine instruction, forming a moving city that breathed, flexed, and followed God's presence. Every day became a new test. Would they complain about the heat or thank him for shade? Would they hoard the manna or trust that tomorrow he'd provide again? The desert, it turns out, wasn't punishment. It was training for both body and spirit. 3. Wells of the Patriarchs. Where there is desert, there must also be water. And where there is water, there is life. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob understood this better than anyone. Their greatest legacy wasn't just faith. It was wells. Each well was a victory, not of war, but of patience. Digging through rock, day after day, under a burning sun, hoping for the sound of water beneath the earth. Genesis 26 tells us how Isaac reopened the wells of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up. Every time a well flowed, they gave a name: Ezek, Sitnah, Rehoboth. Each name meant something: struggle, opposition, and finally, room enough. These weren't just wells. They were testimonies, monuments to perseverance. Even today, archaeologists have found ancient wells in Beersheba and Gerar, some nearly 4,000 years old, still functioning. The same water Isaac drank may still run through them. And in those wells lies a deeper message. God may not always give abundance at once, but for those willing to dig deeper, there's always living water waiting below. The city and the idol. But not every civilization used wisdom for good. Some built empires not on humility, but on pride. Take the great cities along the Nile, Thebes, Memphis, Luxor. They rose like jewels in the sand, but their hearts turned from the Creator to creation itself. They worshiped gods of the sun, the river, the animals, forgetting that the true God was behind them all. And with that came corruption, indulgence, and slavery, not only of people, but of the spirit. The Bible doesn't just condemn Egypt as a place. It condemns what Egypt became, a symbol of humanity's obsession with control. That's why when God led his people out, he didn't send them into another palace. He sent them into the wilderness to unlearn the ways of pride, because before a nation could rule, it had to learn how to serve. Before it could build temples, it had to rebuild trust. 5. Wisdom in the shadows. Yet even in Egypt, not all was evil. For there, God placed his servants, Joseph, Moses, men who learned to walk among idols without bowing to them. Joseph, once a slave, became the architect of survival for an entire empire. He built massive granaries, predicted the famine, and turned Egypt into a place of refuge. When the famine spread across the world, people came to Joseph for bread, a preview of the day when all nations would come to Christ for the bread of life. Moses, too, learned the wisdom of Egypt, mathematics, engineering, philosophy, and later used that very knowledge to lead the Israelites into freedom. It's as though God borrowed the tools of Egypt to build his own kingdom. You see, the line between faith and knowledge isn't opposition. It's partnership. Every skill, every discovery can be turned toward light or darkness, depending on who holds it. 6. The cities of sin. But where Egypt used knowledge to build, others use it to destroy. Travel north and you find the ruins of Canaanite cities. Jericho, Megiddo, Hazor, places where idols ruled every home and the line between worship and immorality vanished. They were advanced. They had walls so thick you could ride chariots on them, irrigation systems, pottery that rivaled the Greeks. But they had lost a heart. Scripture calls these places abominations, not because of ignorance, but because of arrogance. They had everything, yet forgot who gave it. And when the Israelites arrived, God's command wasn't simply to conquer, but to cleanse, to remind the world that no civilization can outbuild the consequences of its own corruption. The ruins still stand today, silent testimonies of what happens when greatness forgets gratitude. 7. The language of light. But in contrast to the idols, Israel built something no empire could copy, a faith that lived through story. While others carved their gods into stone, Israel carried their God in words. Every home had a scroll. Every child learned the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Their festivals weren't just holidays. They were rehearsals of faith. Passover reminded them of deliverance. Sukkot reminded them of dependence. Every ritual pointed backward and forward, to memory, to meaning, to Messiah. And those who lived through famine, winter, and exile learned something the empires never did. The true temple isn't made of stone. It's made of obedience. The fire that spoke. Centuries later, in a cold cave near Qumran, a group of scribes called the Essenes preserved scrolls through storms and wars. They hid them in jars, deep in the desert, scrolls that would one day be found by shepherds in 1947. Why? Because they believed the words of God were life itself. Even when kingdoms fell, when empires burned, the word survived. The same fire that once warmed Israelite homes now burned on parchment, and through it, light passed from generation to generation, until one day the light himself came into the world, and the words that once echoed from Sinai took on flesh. 9. From Egypt to Bethlehem. From Pharaoh's palace to a humble manger, the journey of survival comes full circle. The one who once guided Israel through the wilderness was now lying in straw, in the chill of a Judean night. There was no palace, no marble, just a stable's warmth and a mother's faith. But this time, survival wasn't just physical. It was eternal. Because through that child, every lesson to past, every winter endured, every well dug, every fire lit was fulfilled. God, had not only taught his people to survive the world, he had entered it himself.